All right. David Cohen, welcome to the show, to the Winning Momentum podcast with me, Scott Sinclair. Good to see you. I have an immediate question. Are we doomed? Are we just as a world doomed? All businesses, we've had 2 years of a global pandemic, which I'm not going to complain about because me and my family have come out just fine, certainly in comparison to a lot of the world. We have terrible inflation. All of our input costs in business are up hugely. We're not sure that we can pass those input costs through to our customer base, right? Which is hammering our contribution margins. We've had to pay labor bonuses to keep people. We've had to pay bonuses to get people on side. There's been commodity spikes. In our businesses, we use a lot of commodity. So that's been, there's just terrible inflation throughout the economy. We've had supply chain problems. And I think you've experienced that with your client base as well. Long lead times. You and I have discussed that I've had to shut down a sink manufacturer that listeners to my channel will know about because we had no stainless steel in the world. And so we were down for like 6 weeks. And then another company of mine, we were running out of rubber. We were down for several weeks and we had to carry that. And then to restart those supply chains, your money up front. We've got interest rates going up, David. And there was an article by a friend of yours in Toronto I saw recently, Paul at KPMG, which had some crazy sensitivity to, a 25 basis point hike in interest rates was going to just send a bunch of businesses over the edge. Cost of energy is out of control, just completely out of control. And I don't think people understand that fossil fuels and energy are used in everything, right? It's not just going to the gas pump. It's not just a manufacturing plant that uses up a bunch of energy and consumes that in its production, but farming, textiles, every industry is impacted that. I don't know if this is over the top or just my mood, but there just seems to be political uncertainty everywhere. That I think, and in business, to me, the worst thing in the world is uncertainty. It's not tariffs, it's not taxes, it's not things that you can count on and plan around. It's just not knowing, right? Ask anybody in the energy industry what's driving them nuts right now. It's not the lack of pipelines, it's not the regulation. It's they don't want to make an investment and then the government changes their mind 3 weeks later and it just keeps getting worse. And maybe we've got World War III. So who the hell knows what's going on? So my question to you is, are we doomed? Am I being pessimistic? What are you seeing? You're going to introduce yourself in a minute, but you are a world-leading insolvency bankruptcy attorney. You do a number of other things as well, but you do that. What are you seeing in the marketplace? How are you feeling about things?
It's a long question. And the answer, I'm a bit of I study history. It is an interest to me. This is not the first time. This won't be the last time. We're faced with what a particular generation perceives as an existential threat. I have to tell you, I have incredible faith in humanity. And I believe that we adapt, that the very nature of business, the very nature of law, the practice of law, what you do in your business and your advisory services, is that we are specialists in adaptation. And so, yeah, there'll be some belt tightening over the next 2 years in Canadian households. There will be a flight to value in the markets. Speculation will be down, I suspect. People will spend more carefully. Right now, the consumer price index is suggesting, some stagnation due to inflation, some reduction in purchases. And I think that's indicative of people just looking forward and saying, I'm going to pause. I don't need that, second snowmobile or third fishing rod, and I don't need to go on that boys or girls weekend trip to here or there. I can do something a little closer to home. It has one of two effects on people, right? It either binds you together or breaks you apart. And I think that certainly the social culture of Canada, with the exception of maybe the trucking strike that we're seeing right now, the social culture of Canada is that we huddle together when there's a threat. So I'm optimistic that the Canadian mindset actually, we're survivalists by nature. If you live above the 49th parallel and you have winters like we do, and you're only 2 generations removed from people who lived on dirt floors. My grandfather was probably born in a dirt floored house in Newfoundland. And I'm not that far out of that generation. My grandmother came from Vilnius, Poland in 1921 in steerage class on a ship out of Poland, not Poland, out of Crimea. And I look at Ukraine and I look at what's going on, this too shall pass. The only unknown to me, the only real threat is the nuclear threat, and that's above my pay grade. So yeah. I'm not going to pay attention to that.
Are you seeing any of this in the marketplace, David? I see a ton of anxiety.
I see anxiety. I see the watch lists at banks growing. That's anecdotally, right. I've heard that the watch lists are growing. But in the last quarter of last year, the watch lists were at an all-time low or near an all-time low, from what I was told by people that I know at a number of the banks. So
that's on my list for later. We're going to talk about that specifically. What sort of industries? I mean, one would think you've come through lockdowns and
look, the auto sector,
decimation of the service industries, but what else are you seeing in the marketplace for trouble?
The automotive sector is going to get challenged. Retail is still going to be challenged. We have to watch our residential real estate situation, because what we've seen is, economies are a function. You know what a slinky looks like when it goes down a set of stairs, back and out and back. Compression, absolutely. Expansion, compression, expansion. COVID created quite a compression, right, of pent up demand for things that were not available. And now we're seeing that expansion, which brings with it, when it's combined with supply chain issues, leads to inflation. But that expansion also leads to mistakes, like everybody building a condo building because they think the look at the market prices today. It's like the moment people start making a judgment based on something that happened 2 years ago and spending money all today for something that's going to come to fruition 2 years from now, you're playing into a supply-demand curve problem. So there are going to be too many condos in a year and a half's time. And, there are some predictions out there that there's going to be a 25% correction in the Canadian real estate market. And if it's not a correction, if it doesn't properly correct itself, it's actually going to be a total failure of the market that'll hit more like a 40% decline. Now, that's economists.
I've been waiting for that decline since the late 80s so I could buy a house in your neighborhood. And it hasn't come yet.
I bought my house in 2008, the last time the market dipped. And I held on to a small dip. I held on to the other house that I had. I held on to it to 2010, and I sold it when the market had recovered somewhat.
I don't want to age us, but it was 1987, maybe, when Toronto real estate went down 50% at the high end. The middle and lower end homes really, they went down 5%, 10%. But back in those days, the $1 million plus homes dropped 50-60%.
My first house in Toronto, I bought for, let's just say, for argument's sake, a number of $350,000. It had been bought by the prior owner for $600,000. So I bought at the bottom of a market.
Exactly. But we haven't seen that since, and I
No.
would
Well,
be blown away
that
if
same
we saw that again.
$350,000 house is now listed for $2.1 million.
Yeah. I mean, it's just
1993 to today. So look, to
crazy.
get back to the real answer to your question, sure, there's breakage, but we're not doomed. We're not doomed. The only thing that can doom us is if Putin decides to push the button not even, he doesn't have to push the button on a nuke. He just has to decide that he wants Poland too, because that will lead to battlefield nukes, which lead to intercontinental ballistic missiles. That's again above my pay grade. So if that's going to happen, I ain't got no control of that, as they say. Yeah. So I'm not going to worry about it. I'll just.
Yeah, but that's where we just break up our friendship. You're in Toronto. I'm in the boonies on top of a mountain. I'm fine.
Again, I'm getting in a car and driving to Newfoundland the first week it happens, right? although nowhere is going to be safe with the cloud that comes down.
Yeah. All right. So the point of my question was the anxiety, the real financial pressure that businesses are facing with inflation on their input costs. They're not able to get labor, and it just needs to show up in the market somewhere. And the capital providers, whether they be banks or further down the balance sheet, it's going to come home to roost. And yes. So I want to talk about that next. But before we do, let's use this as an opportunity to introduce you.
Sure.
For some context. And I just want to say I'm very honored that you are the first guest on the Winning Momentum podcast, which I think is entirely appropriate. Before this, we were doing the Martinis with Scott show for a couple of years, and this has been a rebrand of that and starting to bring guests back. And on Martinis with Scott, you've done three episodes on that. We have also spoken together at conferences and on keynotes, and you've been a big supporter. And in fact, you have shared the content journey with me on our Clubhouse experiments and other things. And you and I have both decided that the experience has made us better professionals, that it has forced us to consider why we do what we do and how to put words to that, and to understand the mindset and the pressures of our client base more than perhaps we used to. Yeah. And so honored to have you on board as my first guest on this. Thank you so much. Please introduce yourself.
So my name is David Cohen. I'm a partner at Gowling WLG in its Toronto office. We are part of the Gowling WLG global law firm with head offices in London and Birmingham in England, and here in Toronto in Canada, and then 7 offices across Canada. I had our financial services industry and sector group, which is one of our largest industry practice focused groups at Gowling's in Canada. And I have done so for about 4 years now. I've also taught at Osgoode Hall Law School. I'm a regular speaker on the speaking circuit. I enjoy sharing knowledge. I learn every time I give a speech. I learn every time I get a question from the audience. And I learn more in the questioning that I get from you, Scott, as an example. And COVID has sort of opened up this virtual opportunity to share our thoughts. Whether I get a piece of work out of it or not is kind of irrelevant. The experience of it is enriching. And the opportunity to share even one point that one person uses that makes a difference to something they're doing, that matters to me.
Just talk about the TMA in that introduction as well.
Oh, yeah. Sure. So in the Turnaround Management Association is a global association with almost 10,000 members worldwide, and I think it's over 55 chapters now. I worked my way up from a board member in Toronto to being a member at large of the executive board in the US, to having a number of vice president positions, to ultimately being elected in 2016 as the president of TMA and the chair in 2017. of the global organization. It was a really enriching experience, and it was a launch pad for a lot of the speaking that I do. I am a early adopter in the Canadian marketplace of using turnaround professionals and businesses rather than following the old sort of slash and burn approach that you will sometimes see undertaken. I believe that there is value to be saved in business with the proper leadership, and that leadership in a volatile environment requires a change agent with that kind of experience. And so, Scott, that's something that you bring to the table. And I'm a strong proponent of whether it be a CRO or a financial advisor, but hiring people and using people in these files that we have, these troubled situations that we have, that add value by bringing urgency to the decision-making process and understanding that there isn't a bad decision. Just a failure to decide is probably the worst decision that you can make. That's right. So
no decision is a decision.
Right. Yeah. It's a decision. No decision is a terrible decision normally. But TMA is very close to my heart. It's an organization that I have a great deal of affection for. I just got back from their conference in February. I spoke on supply chain issues there, and that was probably one of the best panels I've ever presented on. I had a group of panelists talking about pressures on the supply chain in the auto sector, and I learned a great deal from the other participants on the panel and shared it with an audience. It was a blast. I really enjoyed it.
I was at that conference. I should have gone to that panel, being part of the supply chain to automotive. Maybe I would have learned something.
You can go onto the TMA app for that, and you can actually watch the video
can I?
now. Yes. The video is posted on.
What were the key points?
Honestly, for me, the point that I wanted to convey was that it's like race car driving. If you've ever done any race car driving training, you know that when you're trying to go into a turn, you have to know when to brake before the turn so that you don't overshoot. And if you're looking straight ahead into the turn, you're going to drive off the turn. That you have to keep your eye on the other side of the turn out here if it's a right-hand turn, you're looking out to the right and you're steering with your eyes first. The message in that is that you need to not know when you're going into a troubled situation or when you're going into a pandemic economic crisis. You need to know where your exit is the day you start thinking about the entry. If all you're worrying about is what happened,
I call that define success.
Right.
What is success in this situation? Don't let someone else define it for you. You need to know what you're trying to accomplish right up front.
Right up first day. A very good anecdote. A board of directors. I wasn't on this board and I wasn't at the meeting, but a board of directors on the 14th or 17th of March. I was told about this by somebody I know quite well. On the 17th of March, this board of directors, in 17th of March in 2020, just after the big COVID wall came down in North America, this was in the hospitality business, and they defined what the exit was for themselves within days of the start. It was sort of like that scene from Taken with the father who's
Liam Neeson.
And his daughter's under the bed, and he's saying, now look around, listen to the voices gather. Now prepare yourself. They're going to grab you. They sort of said, okay, we know it's going to be bad. We're under the bed. We know we're going to get grabbed by this pandemic. We need to be aware of where we're going so that we can help ourselves get out of it. And we need to know where
hunt the guy down in Paris. Oh, that was such a great movie.
Right. It was a great movie. But the idea that you need to be more than aware of more than just prepared for what's coming immediately, that you have to be prepared for the solution that you're going to use to get out and around it.
Yes. So before your introduction, we were talking about how the banks are looking at, what you're seeing in the marketplace. And you mentioned just in passing in that answer that the watch list at the banks you've heard is growing. And the next thing I had jotted down for myself here was how, you have optimism that we will get through this. I, of course, have optimism that we will get through this. I don't believe we're doomed, but I think that a lot of business owners think that we're doomed. And to me, because of my line of business, I see it as an opportunity. I have to remind myself of that every day, but I see it as an opportunity for me in working with troubled businesses and acquiring troubled businesses and helping owner managers turn around. How are the banks looking at this? What is their view of the world right now? And I would just as a setup to that, would let our audience know, and you can correct me where I'm wrong, but the professionals in this business, the lawyers, the accountants, the turnaround firms, 2 years ago, they just hired like mad. They staffed up to deal with the impending bankruptcies and restructurings from the pandemic and the lockdowns. And then it never really happened. And I've heard that some, particularly one mid-market accounting firm in your area, has been laying off a bunch of people from that. And so they're sort of de-emphasizing that service group, which means that they believe that the banks are never really going to be aggressive on their portfolio with these troubled companies. I'm just guessing. What are you seeing from your side? What are the banks seeing? To me, it just there has to be a culling of the herd at some point, I think.
I think the answer is no more than usual. I think that I think that organizations, companies that are in trouble, probably were going to get in trouble.
For sure.
I think that if you've got a business that was in good shape and survivable and had adaptive leadership styles, that their bottom line might take a hit for a time period, and their bonus pools might take a hit for a period. But I think for the most part, they get through unscathed. There's another group where, frankly, the government assistance actually acted like spackle over a hole right in the wall. It's like no solution at all. They just got a deferral. And so I think that those chickens will come home to roost. But they were always going to. They actually got a deferral from the pandemic because, remember, Ottawa turned to the banks and said, be patient. And the banks said, we're corporate citizens, we're patient. And they continue to be patient. I look recently, and
you see the same in the U.S. as well, right?
Yeah. Well, I've heard it. So, yeah. There's no where's bankruptcy gone is the question in the U.S. The first quarter of this year saw an uptick in restructuring work out of the U.S. I'm getting more calls internationally. Right now I'm working on 4 debtor files, which for me is unusual. I tend to be a more creditor-oriented lawyer, but I'm working on 4 debtor files, and the reality is the skill set that I'm bringing to that is knowing how to speak to financial institutions and keep them calm and seeking cooperation and going with a real plan that's well defined and can come to a solution. But if you're asking sort of what do I see coming, I think that there's going to be breakage. Of course there is, right? Yeah. As the government money ebbs out, the tide goes out, you get to see the rocks, you get to see the broken bottom, you get to see all the obstacles, and it becomes apparent. So the tide's going out, the sloshy money from Ottawa is going to disappear, and that's going to make a difference. That's going to make a difference. It's already making the difference in the U.S. What's different, though, is that there's still buyers out there. So there's still this massive wad of unallocated capital out there that is trying to find a home to be productive. As more private equity firms enter the marketplace, as more hedge funds enter the marketplace, as more private lenders enter the marketplace, so as more people put their money, out of bricks and mortar and into equities, looking for places to park where people perceive distressed acquisitions as a substantial opportunity for quick gains and quick turnarounds. And as a consequence, even the broken companies have buyers. But if your broken company is number 5 in a 5-company industry and you're broken, you're not going to find a buyer. You need to be number 1 or number 2 with a problem, right? And if you're number 1 or number 2 with a problem, you're probably going to find a shotgun marriage. of some sort that's going to solve your problem. Your equity is probably going to get diluted a little bit in that process, but you're going to live to fight another day. The trick is, and so all of that frothy money in the market makes it a little bit still distorted, because what we're not seeing things break and fall off the rails and be sold at auction. What we're seeing is private processes solving problems inside of quiet forbearances. So I would tell you that I was just as busy in 2020 and 2021 and 2022 with very few filings. And the very few filings means it's all happening out of court. It's all happening.
Yeah,
it's in my realm.
Workout.
It's in my realm, which is the corporate restructuring side as opposed to the litigation restructuring side. And I've been busy. And I was the first quarter of this year, knocked the lights out busy with transactions.
Yeah, I just want to step back and explain that for some of the audience who isn't sort of neck deep in this stuff. When you can't pay your bills in a company, you can correct me where I'm wrong. When you can't pay your bills in the company in the normal course when they come due and you have no real hope of paying them in the near future, you have to do something about it. And what you need to do is restructure how you pay. And that always comes down to a negotiation or a discussion or how much you're going to pay. Number one, is that going to be 100 cents of the dollar, 50 cents of the dollar, 10 cents of the dollar? Time. Number two, am I going to pay you 10 cents of the dollar today and be done with it? Or am I going to pay you 100 cents over 5 years or whatever? Right. And three, if it's not today, providing some comfort in between. So if it's a plan to pay out over time, how do you make that creditor, the people that you owe money to, comfortable and secure that that's actually going to happen and that there's a plan that makes sense? So I break it down to those three things.
I would add one more thing.
What's that?
The cost of doing that. So the cost of doing that is something to factor in, because that's how do you buy that solution? So one of the ways to buy that solution is to get an investor and dilute your equity. Another way to buy that solution is to give your debt holder a debt to equity conversion right. Another way to buy that solution is to pay a higher interest rate during that period, but have the interest rate paid in kind or reserved and not paid out until a later date and added to the principal, which causes you to have a bulge that you need to deal with later. There are all sorts of little features that are under the basket of cost, right? And part of the problem with a lot of companies is A, they don't know they have those tools. Yep. And B, they don't understand how to structure that cost for themselves, so they'll give things away too soon, or they'll give too little away and they won't get the runway, right? Or they won't have a plan that supports those costs. It's like any other business decision. You're asking for somebody, your stakeholder, you're asking them to make an investment in you and trust you. Well, you're already operating from a kind of broken trust situation. Because you've made one promise to them and now you're not honoring it. But you've got the excuse of COVID, so you're going to get some bot time. Make a good plan, pay the right amount for that plan, and execute it effectively and keep your eye around the corner. Yes.
Right. Okay. So we've got the 4 points. And where I was going to head with that is, just again, so the audience understands if they're not involved in this, you don't have to go file bankruptcy protection. You don't have to file Chapter 11 in the U.S. to accomplish that, or a CCAA, or a notice of intent to file a proposal in Canada. You don't have to go to court to accomplish those 4 things, but you could. And so when you say you haven't done filings, what you mean is you haven't gone to court, but you've been doing the same work, what I would call informally. And the informal process is the exact same thing, but you go to creditors basically one at a time or in a mailing and you say, here's what we're doing. Here's our problem. Do you consent to this voluntarily? Right? So it's still a workout is my point.
You often put it in the context of something called a forbearance agreement, or an amendment to an amendment and a deferral, or a waiver agreement, or any number of ways. Again, all part of the price, right?
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Thank you.
I was going to give you a little context on the Winning Momentum podcast, which is not really a commercial break, but did you know, David? Did you know that 90% of new businesses, and there's a lot of new businesses. I think it's 600,000 a month in corporations in the U.S. I mean, it's a crazy. Not all of those aren't businesses, of course. There's lots of holding companies and other things in there. But 90% of new businesses never, ever, 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 ever pay their founder a living wage. Ever. They just never. So, you always hear these failure rates and success rates in new businesses with entrepreneurs. And you and I have had some podcast discussions with entrepreneurs, and we've learned about the trials and tribulations that they go through. But, it's just astounding to me that 90% will never, ever take a wage out of that. And of the 10% that survive, a very small percentage actually create wealth for themselves. So they can have a paycheck, they can support their family, right? They can put their kids through school, but they're never, ever able to create that exit that generates the wealth for the family, for multi-generation, or for a retirement life. It's an astonishing statistic.
What's the statistic? Over 90% of the wealth is held by 1% of the population.
Yeah, it's incredible, right? And it's just
if
getting
you belong
worse.
to the 1%, good for you.
Yeah. So this Winning Momentum podcast is trying to attack those stats. It's trying to, if you can improve those by 1%, which is a wild dream, the math on the number of people that you're helping is insane, because you and I live in a world where we help companies one at a time, or 6 at a time, or whatever your capacity is on a client base. And what I've been trying to do here, and what you've participated in, is to decentralize that a little bit and get some content out and to help entrepreneurs, owner managers, executives in mid-market, smaller businesses who are struggling. Because even if you're successful, every business runs into trouble. And
I think we could tease the list apart a little bit, because it's like, even with great management, 90% of those new businesses, maybe 88% of those businesses won't succeed because they didn't start with necessarily a sound idea, Scott.
Yeah.
Like I hear business pitches all the time from young people and old people alike, and all generations. And I mean, I'm guilty of being pessimistic, but every so often I just look at them and go, it's sort of like watching Shark Tank, where Kevin O'Leary looks at the person and say, "You are better off going back and becoming a teacher and not trying to do this. You are going to lose every cent you have. This is a bad idea." So to a certain extent, testing your idea is the first thing. Okay? Because not every one of your great ideas is in fact a great idea.
Yeah. You and I see troubled businesses that have been around for a long time, and they just have bad management.
Oh yeah.
We always see that, right?
But I'm making this distinct. Like, I think that there's a fairly significant number of those businesses that didn't deserve the oxygen that they got, and people burned their money pointlessly because they had a dream that wasn't actualized. My issue with all of this is it has a lot more to do with perspiration than it does inspiration, right? Yeah. Hard work and selflessness build great businesses. And it's funny how people who work hard are lucky.
Just as an aside on this, I once had a fellow years ago pitch me. Do you remember accessories?
Yes.
They put them on how would you describe a success tree? I always struggle to describe that.
No, I can't.
Right? It would be a poster on the wall of a beautiful golf green, and it would say, inspiration. And then I have a little blurb about that, right? And there'd be another one on enthusiasm or hard work. I had a guy pitch me once on accessories on pillowcases, so that as you slept on them, it would absorb into you. Just as an example of bad ideas. And I had another one. I was in my office in Ottawa back in the day, and I got a call from my office at Scotia Plaza in Toronto with one of my VPs on the investment banking side. And he phoned me. He says, "We got a guy here who's got a transporter technology like on Star Trek, and he needs the stuff that you hear. He needs $2 million." I said, "Well, look I'm at 130 Albert Street, Suite 1500 in Ottawa. You get me to the boardroom right now, and I'm in." Right? It didn't happen, by the way.
No, but look, when I talk about that, I talk about hard work and eye on the ball, um, and the fundamentals of business. You talked about it a lot, getting the fundamentals right. I, See, that statistic doesn't surprise me because I've lived with it my whole life. My father was an entrepreneur. He had successful businesses. He had unsuccessful businesses. His ultimate success in business was that he was resilient. And, it's like anything else. When I hire people, when I choose a business partner in a business, I want somebody who's incredibly resilient, right? I don't want somebody with a thin skin and who's going to flame out. I want somebody who understands that the only way to success is to push through failure.
Yeah, I agree with that. Which leads me to my next point. And the context of the winning momentum content was for the next point, which is even if you survive and you've gone through all of the turmoil of the last 2 years and what we're facing right now with supply chain inflation and labor, good businesses run into trouble. Almost every good business runs into trouble at some point. And when they do, they have to figure out a way to work with their lender, right? Or with their capital providers. And you and I did a show way back in the beginning of Martinis with Scott, which was one of my most popular shows. We tackled that, how to work with a lender. And I want to cover again some of those points, see if your thinking has been updated. And let's just do it this way. If you're offside with your bank, if you're a mid-market or smaller business right now, today, you're offside with your bank. To me, the bank has to make a decision, a fundamental 2 branches to the decision tree. And then there's a bunch of branches after that. But the fundamental is, do I support this company or do I not support this company? Right? I mean, that's what the bank has to decide fundamentally. And then if they decide to support it, there's a bunch of different criteria and issues that go along with that. And if they decide to not support it, what does that mean exactly? Right? So it's not that simple. But at the end of the day, the bank has to either buy into what you're telling them or not. And with that in mind, what is David Cohen's playbook for the debtor side, for the borrower, for the company, not for the bank? But how do you approach these situations today?
Okay. First of all, I start with a conversation with management. I get where their mind is and their heart is. And usually they're in one of those 4 stages of dealing with the death of their company, right? Denial, anger, or sorrow, or acceptance. And I try and then get them to acceptance quickly. But I generally need help with that. In the sense that I'm just a lawyer. I can't fix what's broken in their business. They think they can. And that's often the biggest mistake they make. And it's the first mistake they make because they haven't been in this environment before. Most of them. A few have, but many have not. And so if they're getting advice from their accountant and they think that's the cat's meow, then, I'll sit in a meeting with their accountant, with them, and I'll listen. And after the meeting, if their accountant is great and is really integrated into the business, understands what needs to be done, and understands the concept of a turnaround, then I'm perfectly happy. 9 times out of 10, I just turn to the client and say, you need horsepower. You need to hire somebody.
Right.
You need to hire somebody who is a change agent, who has done this enough times that they're not emotional and they're not afraid to tell you the truth. You are the emperor and you are wearing no clothes. And so
the value of that person or firm that you're going to hire, to me, is a few things. One is they speak the language and they know the tools of the trade in a discussion with the lender or the capital provider. So that would be number one.
And the stakeholders.
Yes.
The other stakeholders.
Yeah. So they know the language. Number 2 is they're not emotionally vested in this situation, so they don't have a victimhood mentality. They're not hung up with the pressures of the day-to-day and trying to keep the business alive while they're negotiating at the same time. And they have a credibility, presumably.
Circumstantial guarantee of trustworthiness that's associated with a reputation in the market. I'm not hiring unknowns. I'm getting them to hire people who I know have a reputation for succeeding in turnarounds.
You and I have had discussions before about the concept of a trust bank. And maybe you want to talk about that a little bit and how that fits right into this.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I've always said, and I've said this for a very long time in my career, that trust is like money in a bank. It's very easy to spend it. It's really hard to bank it. And once you bank it, if you spend it all in a day because you make a bad decision and you lose the trust of your lender, getting that trust back is going to take time and it's going to be expensive. And so you need to treat every time you spend trust is critical, which then goes to the flip side, which is working with people, not working at odds with people, which is learning how not to be a pushover and just do what you're told, but to learn how to be forthright with people and convince them. Because you said something about the company is in trouble. It's not the company is in trouble and what is the bank going to do with the company? It's management. And what's the bank going to do with management? Does the bank trust management? And is the bank prepared to pause and let management solve this problem? The bank wants management to solve this problem. The financial institution or the lender in the circumstances, I should say lender because it's not always a bank, the lender in these circumstances wants a solution to come out of the company, but they don't want a hockey stick. They don't want a projection that looks like this. You know what a hockey stick looks like, right? I can't do it. This, I'll draw a line like this, where, if we just get 18 months, we're going to rock it up like this over at the end of the 18 months. They don't want a hockey stick. They want a plan, a well-reasoned plan, right? And you have to go to so the person that you hire, which this fits in nicely, Scott, the person that you hire to assist with that will know how to speak lender plan, right? They'll know the vernacular. They'll know that you can't put this in it. They'll know that you'll have to strip out the cars to your kids and the condo in the Cayman Islands and the boat owned by the company and all of those things. All of those costs need to be shed in some way for you to have credibility. And they're going to know that up front. And they're going to know that you may have to give up some sacred cows, that although you think they're good businesses, if they're just breaking even, they're not just they may not be contributing to your overhead sufficiently, and so they actually have to go. They'll know where you need to cut. And generally speaking, people don't realize that they need to cut deeper and sooner to survive.
Right? I was working with a company that you know about in 2000, 2001. And this company had a lot of trouble. It had management credibility issues. It had been through 9 lenders in 4 or 5 years in different jurisdictions. It at one point was paying an interest rate of 18% plus default, let's call it 21%. If you're paying 21% interest, you're a troubled company. I love that product, by the way. That's an amazing product to help a business get out of trouble. But no company can afford to pay that forever, right? You're, by definition, a troubled company if you're paying that much on your senior debt. They were messing around with inventory reporting to juice up their borrowing base, which, I don't want to put strong words on that, but is a horrible thing to be doing, certainly from everybody's perspective, but particularly the banks. They were sucking money out for a bunch of family members working throughout the company and probably not doing anything. They never reported on time. They never reported accurately to the bank. And they had this terrible victim attitude. Why is the bank doing this to me all the time? But David, even with all of that, the banker would call me and say, "Why does he still have that Porsche?" That was the thing that just pissed them off the most.
Lightning rods.
As you're saying.
Lightning rods. Yeah, Nero, right? Fiddling while Rome burns.
Yeah. You used to have a story about people being on vacation during these times.
It just happened to me again. Of course, it was March break. So everybody disappeared. It was like we were in the middle of a crisis, and I was like, all right, I'm gone for a week. I'm looking around. I'm the only person sitting in Toronto wondering where everybody's gone. And I just look at it and go, it's a crisis. Just okay. So we're at the front line in France in World War II. Okay, and the Germans are marching around the Maginot Line, right? And I'm the commander, and I'm going, time for tea. I don't get it. I'm sorry, I don't get it, and it happens. I must say, in 30 years, I've probably seen it happen 30 times.
No, I know, and I get it, and I'll tell you why. Because my number one piece of advice, I'm not saying it's the most important piece of advice, but it might be. But just the top of my checklist is you have to admit you're in trouble to yourself, and then to others. But if you never admit you're in trouble, I'll just go on vacation. Why do I need to sell the Porsche?
I have a
Why do I need to drop that lease? You have to admit. But once you admit you're in trouble, it's like a switch, right? Now you can say, it's really easy to make those hard decisions when you know that you're just toast if you don't.
And I also think it's exhaustion, because often by the time somebody gets to a conversation with me or a conversation with a financial advisor that I bring in, they've already been running it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for 6 months, because they've been going in circles, not getting an answer. And then when they finally get an answer, it's sort of like, oh, things are all solved. I'm going to take a break while you guys think about it. Meanwhile, businesses don't run without leaders present. Like that's right.
They sure don't.
Right. So Scott, I'm a little jaded about that part of it, but I've done a few restructurings right now, and I'm lately where some of them have gone very well, and some of them have been very bumpy. Even the ones, whether they're going well or they're bumpy, they're only going well or only going bumpy, not because of me, not because of a financial advisor, but because they've got a client that actually gets it, has rolled up their sleeves, and has taken the advice and is executing on it. I can't run your business for you, and you can't run your clients' businesses for them for any length of time. They need to give you control of certain aspects of it so you can go negotiate for them, but they need to run their businesses and run them well.
Assuming they have the skills, the roadblock to running their business and navigating through this crisis, in my experience, is often a mental filter of this isn't happening to me. I'm a victim, and just pushing the ball to tomorrow without really making any progress. That's my experience on it, which is why I always come back to this. You need to admit to yourself that you're in trouble. It's like being an addict.
Denial,
you got to hit rock bottom.
Denial, anger, sorrow, acceptance. Denial, I don't have a problem. It's somebody else's problem. Anger, why did you lend me so much money, bank? It's your fault that you got me to make that acquisition. Your your investment bank pushed me to buy that company. I wasn't responsible for my own due diligence. I didn't know the asset I was buying, which is a terrible excuse. Sorrow, oh my God, I've got all these employees. I'm going to lose my kids, won't be able to go to private school. All of the other things that go along with that, all the fears. And then acceptance. Okay, I got a problem. I need to fix the problem. I've got my eye is around the corner. How am I going to get there? Denial, anger, sorrow, acceptance. If you are in any of the first three stages, you're failing. You're going to fail 100%. If you're in any of those first three stages and you don't get out of them, you are going to fail.
That's right.
Only in the fourth. It's only in acceptance.
Let's talk briefly about when the management team is in front of their banker, a special loans officer, or whatever group that they're in. They're already in financial trouble. They've been summoned to the mound, so to speak. I once, in a tongue-in-cheek in a keynote address with you, talked about the three profiles of people walking into that situation. And one is what you described, the hockey stick. This is not an issue. Honestly, the contract's coming in. it'll be here next week, that big sale, and then everything's going to be fine. And I don't even know what you're talking about, right? So it's just a rosy sales pitch. There is no trouble. That would be one profile. Another one is victimhood, but beyond victimhood. It's not only should you not be doing this, but if you don't do this for me, Mr. Banker, we're done. We're done. And you're going to lose all your money. And you need to fix us. You just need to give me an over advance, waive these covenants. I'm here to tell you the problem you have, right? You've heard that a lot. And then there's what you ought to be doing, which is the taking responsibility, taking immediate action, cutting the burn rate right away before you even get to the meeting, right? And then sharing that plan and what you're doing about it with your banker, with your lender, with your stakeholder. You want to comment on those profiles?
Yeah, I think they're pretty accurate. The one I like to focus on is obviously the last one. The other two are, unfortunate. They won't get past go.
But you see them a lot.
Yeah, a good lender, a really good lender, will coach you through it. They'll go, okay, Mary, I hear you about your projections, but what happens if you don't hit that? What's your contingency planning for dealing with the payroll that you have to make 2 weeks after that deadline when you think that cash is coming in? And, their immediate ask will be, if you believe in the plan that much, do you have money that you're prepared to put into your business to make that happen? They want to see some skin in the game. Mary, put the money in. And then if you have the second one, which is the sort of lashing out anger, it's sort of like the bankers will just sit there and look at them and they'll be silent. They'll look at them and it'll be just silence. You don't understand portfolio risk. So, the old story is if you owe the bank $10 million, you can't pay it back, you're in a lot of trouble. If you owe the bank $200 million and you can't pay it back, the bank's in trouble for a quarter, not even, right? Like portfolio risk, look at it this way. When banks lend, a certain percentage of their loans are going to fail. They make an allowance for that failure called a reservation, right? They have a reservation on their loans. And so some loans get reserved based on their performance. By the time you walk into them and say that this is your problem, and if you're talking to the special loans group at a bank, you've already there's an internal negotiation between the side of the bank that booked it and the side of the bank that has to collect it about what the reservation is going to be on your account. And that reservation, could be 50%. If you got a $5 million loan, they could be saying, we're looking, based on our analysis of the collateral on first glance, we're looking at a $2.5 million recovery if this thing goes completely in the tank. If we get full cooperation, we could get $100 back. But if somebody comes in and says, this is your problem to solve, they're just looking at where you stand in their portfolio and going, yeah, this quarter we can take your loss. So, all right, pass me the keys, you're done.
Yep.
Like there's you got to understand the management structure inside of the financial institution. And by the way, there's lots of lawyers who act for debtors who don't understand that, who don't really understand the decision making inside of a bank, and again, who don't understand the decision making inside of a bank. And the decision making inside of the banks, in my experience, are incredibly fair and incredibly indulgent, and will sometimes sort of look after they see the client saying something like, "You got to solve this, bank." They'll just turn to the professional advisor and say, "Can I talk to you for 5 minutes in the hall? Can you, we're 90 seconds before self-immolation here. Can you go get your client to get back on track to helping us solve the problem with them?" The solution has to be driven by the company. It's never driven by the financial institution. Any solution driven by a financial institution is going to start with the letter R, receivership. Yeah. Right?
That's and so I think one of the really important points out of that is, you've got a mid-market or a smaller business, and Windsor, Ontario, or Dayton, Ohio, or Columbus, and you've got they have their local professionals who they trust and have worked with their entire lives, perhaps for multiple generations, the lawyers, the accountants. But those professionals may not be experienced in exactly this. They're probably terrific professionals for what they do, but you need somebody who understands what the bank is thinking to be able to navigate this. If you're going to get your persuasion and your plan, your turnaround plan, and all of that on, is that fair to say?
Yeah. Look.
Or in the alternative, just be really humble and ask questions.
Look, I think hubris is a mistake, and I said this on the last one we did on this topic. Hubris is a terrible mistake, and hubris leads to it's an absence of humility in the way that you approach the problem. Hubris is a deadly sin when it comes to negotiating a solution, right? You have to be an advocate. You can't be a pushover. You have to do what's right for the business. And if you've got a lender on the other side that is being obstreperous and difficult and old school and harsh, you have to sometimes push back, right? But there's a way to push back, right? Pushing back is not shouting.
Absolutely not. So, just in the interest of time, so when a company is meeting with their banker and they're starting to negotiate, okay, there's our turnaround plan. Here's what we're going to do about this. Mm-hmm. And then you end up with a discussion about a forbearance agreement, which you referred to earlier, or the same sort of thing, but done different ways with covenant waivers or what have you. Can you talk about what a forbearance is? Just because I think the target audience here for this content needs to understand that and the alternatives to it.
If you've got a loan agreement and the terms of the loan agreement are strict on financial covenants, financial tests that you have to meet on a monthly, quarterly, or annual basis, depending on what the test is, tangible net worth, your leverage ratio, whatever your ratio is, and you are going to break all of those covenants because of underperformance of your company on a financial basis, then you have to amend the covenants in some fashion and to get them relaxed to allow you to survive without being constantly in default with the bank. The price of that waiver or forbearance from enforcement, and that's why we call it a forbearance agreement, the price for that is also creating a plan. Maybe the plan is that your covenants will ratchet back up over a period of time on events. Maybe the bank will stop measuring your long-term financial covenants and even your short-terms and may just go to a cash flow test to make sure that you're not in a negative cash flow situation, so that you can always, that you're performing enough to be able to make payroll. They might be prepared to give you a bulge. That would be documented in a temporary loan advance to get you out of a specific problem. That might be documented in a forbearance. A forbearance mightn't be something that happens if the bank says, look, you know what, we're not the type of bank you should be dealing with now. You need to go get different money from different people because our money is too cheap and we don't lend to troubled companies. So we want you to exit this bank, or what they do is they demarket you. We want you to exit this bank. And so you'll be given a time frame within which you have to find a replacement financing. And the argument becomes that. If you want to stay in the bank, maybe they want you to sell a division to pay down their debt. Maybe they want you to find an equity infusion to pay down your debt and provide you with working capital. Maybe they want you to get subordinated, borrow a subordinated loan from at a higher interest rate behind the bank to help support the business. So a lot of things can go. There are as many forbearance agreements as there are particular fact situations, but they'll usually include milestones by which you have to do something. And it'll include some adjustment to the covenants in a pattern with them getting better over time in the pattern. It will include way enhanced reporting, and it might include what we call soft monitoring, or a bank financial advisor being paid to go in and scrub the books and records of the company and to give them an independent verification that they can trust as to the whether the company is on track or isn't on track, whether it's a good plan or a bad plan. Sometimes they'll let the company's financial advisor give that information if they trust the company's financial advisor and they already know them. But there'll be reporting covenants where that financial advisor will report directly to the financial institution on a periodic basis. And that enhanced reporting will be it's what we call the trust but verify world, right? It's like nuclear arms armament.
Yep.
Is that a good enough
picture? Full circle. No, that's perfect. Thank you. And I wanted to stress, in my business and career in the last, 10 years, I think we've been in 27 countries. You have worked globally, right?
Yep.
So when you refer to specifics of the law in this podcast, you're referring to Canadian, maybe even specifically Ontario
law.
Law. But that's happened once in this podcast. Everything else that we're talking about in terms of what a restructuring is, how to deal with your stakeholders, even what a forbearance agreement, because that's just a contract, that's applicable everywhere in every jurisdiction, correct?
It is. The latitude with which you can do certain things depending on jurisdictions could change. But the principles that you sit down and you document a roadmap out in a contract, for example, is universal.
Yeah, exactly. And the tools that you need to do that, your cash flow and turnaround plan, which we've run out of time to talk about those, but we will on a future discussion. David, I've used most of your hour, I believe. This show is about, it's called Winning Momentum for a reason. And the reason for that is that over 30 years of working with businesses and trying to turn them around, I've really concluded that it's not anyone's job to tell you when the business has been turned around. It's not like yesterday it was troubled and today it's not troubled, right? What you really need to focus on as the business owner is waking up every morning and knowing that today will be a little bit better than yesterday, right? And creating that momentum. And when you do that, that burnout that you described earlier starts to go away, it creates energy, it attracts resources, both financial and human. People want to work for you when things are moving in the right direction. People want to invest in you when things are moving in the right direction. Give me 3 of David Cohen's strategies. Could be just in a personal life or in a business or in your career. When things are going wrong, what do you look to turn that momentum around?
When faced with a conflict, sometimes your immediate reaction is anger, and you have to resist that. So
remove the emotion.
Remove the emotion. Well, I call it your calming moment, right? Like sit back. If I have a really heated discussion with somebody, following that discussion, before I, write off the missive email to be angry about it, I will go and take a walk. And I will breathe, and then I will try. So that's the first thing. And then on the walk, the second thing happens. What was going on the other side of that conversation? What was motivating that person? What was putting them into their position and their posture? And so understanding what is motivating them and their needs and their desires, their fears, that's just as important, because in understanding them, then what you can do is develop the third thing, which is empathy, right? You can't negotiate in an empathetic background. If you don't care whether the person across the table lives or dies, then you're unlikely to ever get to a solution with them, right? So you have to develop an empathy you don't have to agree with them. You don't have to capitulate to them, but you certainly have to try and understand from whence they come, right? And so for me, it's the walk, the self-reflection on where I am myself and why I'm reacting the way I am, and then turning that to say, okay, but I'm reacting to somebody else, so why are they acting that way? And then to turn that into empathy. So it's more like 4 steps, but it's all
Right.
one parcel. It isn't
Sure.
3 things. It isn't 3 things. It's a continuum, right?
Yes. One
So,
leads to the other.
right. My most successful negotiations are when I've stepped out of the room and gone for a walk with my client and just gone and had a coffee and sort of vented a little bit and then said, okay, let's put ourselves in their shoes for a few minutes.
Yep. Yep. That's
That's
terrific.
very
Thank you for that.
Empathy is a powerful tool.
You can't negotiate anything without empathy.
Right.
You just can't.
And that's why, Putin is incapable of negotiating with Zelensky, because Zelensky has empathy, but he's an injured party, and Putin is a sociopath with no empathy.
Well, one might argue that Zelensky's, got his own issues as well.
Yeah, he does.
Right?
He does.
And so, it's a conflicted issue for me because for a while I was getting, as you might imagine, text messages from Kiev every morning, and at a personal level because I have friends there, and so it was a very one-sided mental thing for me. But as I step back and try to be empathetic, the Ukrainian side is not lily white either, nor the Americans. Like nobody is. There's no good guys in this situation.
No, but there's more bad. There's some people who are more bad than good, and I draw the line.
There's only one country invading another. Right. So,
but understanding the motivations helps.
It certainly does. David, how do people reach you when they need your help?
Okay, if you go to www.gowling.com, and I think
Gowling, Gowling is Gowling, WLG.com.
And you put in our little circle, David Cohen, Cohen, you'll find me. But if you actually go onto Google and you say David F.W. Cohen, lawyer, Toronto, I'm going to be the first profile that comes up, and it's going to be the Gowling webpage. So the quickest way to
in the notes to this show, there will be links, everybody. So you want to connect with David. David, are you happy with people emailing you? And
I'm answering about 2 cold calls a week now. And one of them, I got one today from a potential Central American client with an engagement. Cold call. It's a real client. I'm going to be doing work for them probably starting tomorrow. I've got to have a conversation with them tomorrow. I like cold calls. I answer cold calls. Or I get somebody else to answer them. Not if they look like a virus.
or a prince.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to throw in here?
Hang in there, folks. You just have to be resilient. It's not hard. It's a slog, and you just have to be prepared to work through it, and don't tire of working through it, because stopping halfway is like not making a decision.
I'm turning the music off because I just think this is such an important point, which is the reason I started with Why Are We Doomed? David, I don't want to take much more of your time, but you and I are the exact same age, right? And we have to think a long time ago in our career when there was real trouble. I mean, there was 2008, which was sort of trouble. In Canada, I mean, that was way more trouble in the US, but it was sort of trouble in Canada. And then there was the tech boom, which if you were in the financial world was trouble, but maybe for everything else, it didn't matter that much unless you're in the tech business. But before that was when it was like late 80s, right? No, it was 89, 90, 91.
89, 90, 91. I started law, funny enough. I started practicing law. I summered in 89. I articled in 90 and 91. I was called to the bar in 1992. And I'm an insolvency lawyer. Go figure.
Yeah. And nobody, I just think there's a whole segment of business owners and executives who've never experienced a downturn before. and they see this, and there's money everywhere, and so that's never been a serious issue. And they see this, what's going on in the world right now, and they're just freaked out by it.
Scott,
That's my worry.
Millennials, who are a brilliantly creative segment of our population and who make up the life force of our economy now, millennials are all going to develop anxiety disorders, because if you've never sort of lived through this at a young age, and I did at a young age, if you've never lived through this at a young age, and your whole personality has been shaped around being relatively safe, boy, this is scary stuff.
Exactly.
And it doesn't need to be really. Just be resilient, right? Stick to it. Be resilient. One of my sons says to me, one of the skills that I have to learn, one of the skills that I really need to know in life, and that I don't get an opportunity to test yet, is stick-to-itness. And I look at him, almost makes you cry, because you can't teach it. You can only learn it from experience.
Yeah. And not all at once. It's not like you can learn it and do it. You've got to fight your way there.
Right. But they're a great generation, and they're quite capable, and I have every confidence that they will buckle down. And the best example of it is the streets of Ukraine today, with 18-year-olds who've never held a gun, holding a gun and going to war. It scares the living daylights out of me.
Really does. It really does. Thank you for this, David. Hey, everybody, thank you for listening. Check out the new website, thescottsinclair.com, TheScottSinclair. That's my personal branded website. There'll be a bunch of content on there that you can check out. And so thescottsinclair.com, hit subscribe. Listen to us on YouTube, the Winning Momentum Podcast, and all major audio podcast platforms like Apple and Spotify and Google and all that sort of stuff. David, anything else?
Nope.
Thank you.
Carol.
All right, everybody.